What if NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, suddenly ceased to exist? What if this cornerstone of Western security and geopolitical cooperation simply vanished? The ramifications of such a momentous change would ripple through the international system, affecting global security, alliances, economies, and the balance of power. To understand the full impact, we must explore what NATO represents, why it was created, and what its dissolution would mean for its member states and the world at large. NATO was established in 1949 as a collective defense alliance among North American and European countries. Its primary purpose was to provide mutual security against the threat posed by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The famous Article 5 of the NATO Treaty states that an armed attack against one member is considered an attack against all members, binding the alliance in mutual defense. Over the decades, NATO evolved beyond Cold War tensions, adapting to new security challenges like terrorism, cyber warfare, and regional conflicts. Today, NATO includes 31 member countries across Europe and North America, with a combined military spending that dwarfs most other alliances. It acts as a political and military alliance that provides collective security guarantees, coordinates joint military operations, and promotes democratic values among its members. NATO is often viewed as a symbol of Western unity and deterrence against aggression. If NATO were to disappear, the immediate and most obvious consequence would be the loss of collective security guarantees for its members. This loss would generate profound insecurity in Europe and North America. Member states would be left to defend themselves independently without the assurance that others would come to their aid in case of attack. This would especially affect smaller countries that rely heavily on NATO's collective defense umbrella. European nations would be forced to significantly expand their national defense budgets and military capabilities to compensate for the loss of NATO's collective strength. This process would be costly, politically divisive, and logistically challenging. Countries with historically lower defense spending would face a difficult transition to meet new security demands, while others would grapple with rethinking their foreign and defense policies in a new, uncertain environment. The dissolution of NATO would also send a powerful signal to adversaries. Russia, which has historically viewed NATO expansion as a threat to its security, might see this as an opportunity to increase its influence in Eastern Europe and beyond. Without NATO's deterrent presence, Russia could be emboldened to exert pressure on neighboring countries, potentially reigniting frozen conflicts or even engaging in new military confrontations. Similarly, China, while geographically distant from NATO's main area of operation, would monitor the alliance's collapse closely. It might perceive this as a weakening of Western cohesion, potentially encouraging more assertive moves in the Asia-Pacific region. The balance of global power could shift further in favor of authoritarian regimes that seek to challenge Western-led institutions. Without NATO, the European Union would face enormous pressure to fill the security vacuum. Although the EU has made some efforts toward developing its own defense capabilities through initiatives like the European Defense Agency and Permanent Structured Cooperation, PESCO, it lacks the comprehensive military integration and rapid response capability that NATO provides. The absence of NATO could accelerate EU defense integration, but would also expose divisions among member states regarding security priorities. NATO's role in coordinating joint military operations and intelligence sharing would disappear, complicating responses to crises such as terrorism, cyber attacks, and regional conflicts. The loss of a centralized command structure and interoperable forces would undermine the ability of former member states to act swiftly and decisively together, potentially leading to fragmented or ineffective responses. The United States, as the dominant military power in NATO, would face a significant strategic dilemma. Without NATO, America's ability to project power in Europe and maintain influence over the transatlantic alliance would diminish. The U.S. might reduce its military presence in Europe, reallocating resources elsewhere, particularly to the Indo-Pacific region where competition with China is intensifying. For European members, the loss of U.S. security guarantees would be a game changer. Many rely on the U.S. nuclear umbrella and rapid deployment capabilities to deter threats. They would need to reconsider their defense postures, nuclear policies, and alliances. This could spur a range of reactions, from seeking new bilateral security agreements to developing independent nuclear forces or increasing cooperation with other global powers. The loss of NATO would also affect global security institutions like the United Nations and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. NATO has often acted as an enforcement mechanism for UN mandates, particularly in peacekeeping and conflict resolution efforts. Without NATO's military capacity and political cohesion, the UN might struggle to maintain peace and security in various hotspots. Economically, the collapse of NATO could lead to increased instability in global markets. Investor confidence could waver amid fears of escalating military conflicts or geopolitical uncertainty in Europe and North America. Defense industries might see increased demand in the short term, as countries scramble to build up their militaries. But the broader economy could suffer from the disruptions caused by insecurity and reduced cooperation. NATO's existence has also contributed to decades of relative peace among its member states. The alliance has effectively deterred major interstate wars in Europe since World War II. Without NATO, the risk of conflict between former member states or their neighbors could increase, especially in volatile regions such as the Balkans or Eastern Europe. Historic grievances and territorial disputes could resurface without the stabilizing influence of the alliance. Cybersecurity would become a more fragmented and vulnerable domain. NATO coordinates cyber defense efforts among its members, facilitating information sharing and joint responses to cyber threats. The loss of this collective approach would leave individual countries more exposed to cyber attacks from state and non-state actors. NATO also plays a significant role in humanitarian interventions and disaster response. Its logistical and operational capacities are often deployed to provide aid and stability in crisis zones. Without NATO, coordination of such efforts would be more difficult, potentially delaying critical assistance and exacerbating humanitarian disasters. The psychological impact on populations in former NATO countries should not be underestimated. The alliance has been a source of security and confidence for millions of people. Its disappearance could fuel fear, nationalism, and isolationism, destabilizing domestic politics and complicating efforts at international cooperation. Diplomatically, the end of NATO would necessitate a complete reordering of international relations in the West. Countries would need to establish new alliances, partnerships, and frameworks for security cooperation. This could lead to a proliferation of smaller regional defense pacts with varying levels of reliability and capability, potentially increasing instability. The question of nuclear deterrence becomes even more critical. NATO's nuclear sharing arrangements provide security guarantees that help prevent nuclear proliferation. Without the alliance, some countries might pursue independent nuclear programs, sparking new arms races and increasing the risk of nuclear conflict. In the long term, the absence of NATO might prompt the emergence of new security architectures. Countries might band together in novel ways to address shared threats such as terrorism, climate change, or cyber warfare. However, creating a replacement alliance with the same scale, capabilities, and cohesion would be a monumental challenge. The disappearance of NATO would also raise questions about the future of democracy and liberal values in the West. NATO has promoted democratic governance among its members, linking security to shared political principles. The unraveling of the alliance could embolden authoritarian tendencies and undermine efforts to support democracy globally. For non-member states, the absence of NATO changes calculations as well. Countries in Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia that have sought NATO membership for security reasons might feel abandoned and vulnerable. This could push them closer to Russia or other regional powers, redrawing geopolitical alignments. International organizations focused on arms control and non-proliferation might face setbacks. NATO members have been important players in treaties such as the Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, and various arms reduction agreements. Without the alliance's unified front, enforcement and compliance could weaken. In summary, the sudden disappearance of NATO would be a seismic shift in international affairs. The alliance has provided decades of stability, security, and cooperation between North America and Europe. Its loss would create a vacuum fraught with uncertainty, risks, and challenges. The immediate aftermath would likely be increased insecurity, military buildups, and geopolitical competition. Economically, global markets could face volatility amid fears of conflict. Politically, the West would need to rapidly reinvent its security architecture or face fragmentation. Yet, human history shows that even in moments of crisis, new orders and systems often emerge. While the dissolution of NATO would be a dramatic and destabilizing event, the countries involved would eventually seek new ways to ensure their security and prosperity. This scenario invites us to appreciate the complex and often fragile nature of international alliances. It underscores the critical role that institutions like NATO play in maintaining peace and security in an interconnected world. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis of global affairs and geopolitical trends.